I first started preparing this speech at the beginning of the process when I put my hand up to be a speaker. And some of the items that I was going to cover is already in progress, but I shall continue. While I was travelling around Australia in 2017, I started to have an eye problem with my left eye. And while I was in the Northern Territory, my vision was deteriorating. And at times during that trip, I had a determination to see or to do something, because it may be my last chance. A month later, because I was travelling with my wife at the time, and we were just north of Perth, my left eye had irritation like it was with a bit of sand or a grit in it. Then 2 weeks later, while I was staying in Perth itself, I had the usual flashes going up and down. But I did not let my wife know that the problem was still there. The total trip around Australia is about 18,000 kilometres and takes 14 weeks, like 4.5, 5 months. We arrived home late on a Friday, and on the Monday I contacted my GP to make an appointment to see the doctor. Monday afternoon, I saw a local optometrist, and he wanted to get me to see the ophthalmologist that day, but unfortunately there was a conference on, so I had to go and wait a couple of days. And she told me when I saw her 2 days later, eye cancer. Things progressed very fast because before I left her room, she personally phoned up Dr. Conway and made the appointment. So a week later, when I walked into his office, he checked me all out, but already had the operation date. Things were progressing very fast. So 2 weeks later, after the exploration was done, they said, because of where it was, and I actually put him in the spot, you actually mentioned this option, you mentioned that option. So we looked at the options and said, no, had to come out was the best option. And when you look at the other slides, more males have their eyes taken out. Now, I was shocked, anger, upset, and I'm still out of balance because of it. And this is probably why, despite my knowledge of technical stuff, I'm using paperwork. My emotion was partly driven because for 15 years I've been wearing glasses and have regular eye checks. For the previous 5 years, being a type 2 diabetic, I was having a more in-depth examination, and I did the silly thing after they put the drops in my eye, drive home, when you're not supposed to. There's also glaucoma in the family, so I really have had some good checks on the eyes, but nothing was picked up. And I asked the question, why would an optometrist not pick up such a thing? And should they really have picked it up? And the answer was yes. But it may seem strange, but 6 months later I realised how lucky I was being diagnosed with ocular melanoma. But continuing along, about 9 months later, during lunch with some members of the AOMA Facebook group, I started to ask questions. We got around to talking about who else was seeing an optometrist and getting regular checks. And the number of them were. It's actually worked out that 60% of us were seeing optometrists, having eye checks, but did not have early diagnosis. And me, I'm a bit of a stirrer, so I sent an email to the Dean or Head of Optometry in Sydney with this information, with some questions, and say, please explain why. 7 months later, no answer. Now, I do not know, like in Australia, if there's any collection of data on early diagnosis, how we diagnose, the background of what happened beforehand. As we saw earlier, in other countries they do it. But as I have not had any form requested to fill out, and I have received a number of survey forms from hospitals, so that led me to think that type of questionnaire is not being done in Australia. So I would actually like to see that happen here. An ongoing survey in regards to how we're diagnosed, the background, and whether then that can be used for an awareness program. And then later on to see if that awareness program is working by having early diagnosis. Me, it was too late. But if we can get the earlier diagnosed for others, the more option will be available to them. Continuing. Now, I do have above average computer skills, but it's still not as good as some. And in searching for questions, I found a local website in that area, the Shoalhaven Cancer Services Directory. It had different support services, but there's still nothing for AOM. So I joined a local non-specific cancer group to try to get some more information, get some assistance, but really, it did not meet my needs. Finally, really down the track, I found the Facebook group, Ocular Melanoma Australia and New Zealand. Things were really beginning to improve for me. Rare Cancers Australia was disappointing, linked to America. Cancel was no better. The comments, rare melanoma can start in the eye. It's not much. Even the Melanoma Institute of Australia mentions it, but there's nothing there. Their information packs was nothing. I thirst for more relevant information in Australia. In the modern society, social media is progressing more, especially for isolated communities, and that's what we are. We are an isolated community. Our family and friends helps us support us, but there's also limitations to what they can do. My family support was mainly limited to my wife. My other family members were not well, and they basically treated me as if nothing had happened, because I was normally the strong one helping all the others. The non-specific cancer group I found became less relevant to my needs. As I was with them longer, they were mainly focused on fundraising and the social of a monthly meeting, but not therapy. As regular OM group meetings are not realistic, I like the idea of the peer support system in a network, but it's the platform of which how it would be supported. Because peer support does not give medical advice, but lends their ear. And that's what we must remember. And then finally, the double whammy, male breast cancer. And that is why I consider myself lucky to have ocular melanoma, because without those scans checking to see if it had spread, I would not have found out that I had male breast cancer. Because how many of the guys out there check your breast? Yes. I was more interested in checking females' breasts than my own, as a typical male. And that's the message that I give to my relatives. But even then, it was the third scan which picked up the lump. So even then, that diagnosis was not early. But because of the time span, no real damage was done. The pre-operation at Wollongong Hospital, I was introduced to the difference between rare cancer and common cancers. The breast cancer nurse visited me a number of times, including while I was receiving chemo, because my body did not particularly like the needles, and my veins were shutting down. I think in one fortnight I had like almost 16 needles stuck into me, because the breast cancer flagged something. So the gene therapy people wanted to go and say, hey, male with breast cancer, we're going to test you for genes. Just check if you've got a mutation. Oh, but while we're at it, we'll check you for these other things. But unfortunately, I'm not a mute. All my genes are normal. The large network associated with the breast cancer includes Breast Cancer Network Australia with their extensive online network, web information and support kits. And there's none of that was available for ocular melanoma. The OM operation, there was really no support, but then I was also in shock, devastated, which may have clouded me. And really, with the OM, it was in, out, post-operation, here's a referral to get your prosthesis eye done. But when you're living down the south coast and coming up to Sydney, it was only like a 3-hour train ride up to here, but I couldn't drive because I was told don't drive for 3 months, so everything else was public transport, community transport, and all of that I had to go and source out. During one of my regular appointments down to my oncologist, because he then became focused on the breast cancer, I had to ask the question, what about my OM monitoring and schedule? And I was told that the chemo drugs affected that, so it was put on hold. Another visit to the oncologist, and they had a trainee there with no knowledge of OM. The trainee was there again for the next visit, but I didn't see him. I don't want to have to train a new one every 6 months. And really, why take the risk? While oncologist services for common cancers appear to be good in regional areas, my main concern is someone with knowledge of monitoring ocular melanoma and not to have to train the new one. Hopefully I'm not running too bad with time. Pre-OM surgery, my emotions were cloudy, but my thought process during the breast cancer was quite clear. Both post-operation comparisons, OM has a great adverse effect on my life, where the breast cancer, not as much. Especially once the chemo is finished, which is going to be in a few months' time, and I'm determined to get travelling again. I'm surprised that the only support network for OM is through social media, and there is no foundation to support researchers lobbying for support and to help patients and carers like the other networks have. The Ocular Melanoma Facebook group is doing a wonderful job and is the main platform used to support us and inform us on research, peer support, plus bring us together here today, because that's how I found out. The professional people using other resources where we go together, which is the Facebook group. So Susan, you have helped many of us, including me, in a time of need, and I thank you, and continue doing the good work. I would like in the future to make a donation where money will go to ocular melanoma, patient support services, but not go into a pool which will be swallowed up by other groups. Because I did contact one of the cancer groups and I said, if I raise money, would you be able to do it and put it towards ocular melanoma? And they said, no, it just goes into a pool. But now, with AOMA, I don't know if it's a registered charity at this stage, or will it have a charity side to it. Yes, I can see some heads thinking going there. That way, if we make a donation, you can turn around and say, registered charity, tax deduction, and going. I would like it, if possible, for a peer support network to be set up in each state. Sometimes we'll need assistance for training to help people be counsellors. If not, because they're remote people, then FaceTime through Facebook, Because talking to someone on a telephone is less personal than actually seeing them. The website I like to see is already now what we know about, but they need a service directory put there for the patients, so that the doctors in their surgeries, when they have a new client or patient, they can print off and say, here's some information for you. This is where you can get help. The information can include the council helpline, financial support services. You have the isolated patient assistance scheme, support groups, transport services, counselling services, even Visit Australia. You know, I have problems walking around at times. I get out of balance, out of whack. So whether I need to get one of those little nice white canes from Visit Australia. The other information has always been noted, patients' experience, their journey, what they have done to adjust vision loss. I do not believe in reinventing the wheel, as a lot of these items are not new and are found on other cancer websites. So they just need to be adjusted to what is relevant to ocular melanoma and us in Australia. Like only this week I received the Breast Cancer Network magazine called The Beacon, which is published 4 times a year. They have relevant information on there, which is fundraising for donations was one of their biggest things. New drug approvals with information on the drugs, helpline, lobby program to the government, and the latest in the cancer research. Something like this would not be economically viable to be published. But if there is that patient side to a website, it can be put up there and we can read it. Because remember, ocular melanoma, what I've found, is only a footnote on other cancer groups. And we need to lobby for them for changes. Or as we're now seeing, we're going to have our own platform. Now, I have some feedback too. I saw my oncologist on Thursday and he had a different attitude change. 6 weeks previously, he was at a conference and there was a speaker there speaking on ocular melanoma. Yes, it was you, Dr. Joshua. And after that, he actually spoke to you and it actually made a change with his attitude towards me. From being focused on the breast cancer and me having to prod him, what about my ocular melanoma? He then came up and says, okay, well, I went to the conference, there was someone spoke there who was really good speaking on ocular melanoma, and this is what we're going to do for your monitoring. So what you did have an effect. Yes, I got that down as feedback. And hopefully that's some of your other oncologists can actually also have that same effect. When they hear someone speak, get some more information, because I know on the web page people are saying they're not too sure about how they're being monitored, the treatment, so maybe we can get more going there. But I still feel out of whack, out of balance. And I've got my lovely wife up there for support. Yes, I know. My treatment finishes on the 25th of June. My last injection. I was going to start my next little trip on the 26th, but my wife said we should wait a little bit longer. So on the 27th of June, we're going for another drive. Another 4.5 months of driving around Australia. It could be 18 to 20,000 kilometres. And once again, we'll be going to some different places. But like everyone else, my wife is like a crow. She helps me when I drive. Car. But unfortunately, when I have driven by myself a couple of times, I have nearly had an accident. no left eye, the pillar on the vehicle, and I have not seen a vehicle. And you may be wondering what that is. I come from a family who we really like our body parts. My brother had his fingers cut off and he kept them in the freezer. When I saw Dr. Conway, I took that for me because I really wanted my eye. But he said his need was greater than mine. So for the aim of research, I let him have it. I took that also, when I had it, when I had the breast cancer done. Too much tissue to fit in there, but I said, left eye, left breast. Could he take the next bit out on the left-hand side of me? It'll fit in there. But he said Medicare wouldn't pay for it. Couldn't be done. But anyway, I'd be happy when I see, give some information and feedback to the web pages, because I wrote this mainly a couple of months ago before we had the information coming up. Plus, my brain is still cloudy. I did have a big moment when my phantom vision of the falling rain or water down the window pane has stopped. And I'll be glad when my next step occurs. Thank you. Oh, actually, I forgot to say one thing. With all my experience coming through with the doctors and the surgical staff, they have been very well presented. I've come across other medical people who are up themselves, but our lot are not. They are human.